Hey guys, tonight we're going to walk barefoot through the forgotten dust of humanity's earliest neighborhoods. Imagine standing on a dry, cracked mud brick floor, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else. Something coppery and strange. You reach out, your fingers brushing against a wall made of packed clay and dung. And you feel the faint echo of a life lived thousands of years ago. A life that, honestly, you probably wouldn't survive for more than a day. It was a world where every meal was a gamble, every sunset a triumph. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're just listening to drift off, that's cool too. Let me know where in the world you are and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins in a place that looks like a giant, sun-baked honeycomb, Çatalhöyük, in what is now modern-day Turkey. Forget sprawling, planned cities with streets and avenues. In Çatalhöyük, houses were built right next to each other. A sprawling, anarchic mess of mud brick. To get anywhere, you had to climb ladders up onto the roofs of these houses and then drop down into the next one. It was basically a parkour course for the Neolithic age. A place where an inconveniently placed ladder could mean a seriously bad day. Imagine trying to get a couch moved in. It was a city without doors. A city without streets. This was, in many ways, one of the world's first cities. And it was utterly, wonderfully bizarre. Now, a mainstream historical fact you might find in a textbook is that Çatalhöyük was a remarkably advanced settlement for its time. Dating back to around 7500 BCE, its inhabitants were some of the first to domesticate animals and practice agriculture on a large scale. They lived a sedentary life and had a complex society long before the pyramids or the Code of Hammurabi. But here's the quirky or fringe tidbit that'll give you chills. The dead weren't buried in a separate cemetery. They were buried under the floors of their houses. So, as you're walking across that packed mud floor, you are literally treading on the bones of your ancestors, your neighbors, your long-forgotten family. They'd fold the deceased into a tight bundle, sometimes wrapping them in reeds, and then inter them directly beneath the very rooms where the living ate, slept, and lived their lives. But it gets weirder. Many of these burials were headless. The skulls were often removed after the body had decomposed, and then they were treated, plastered, and painted with red ochre to give them a lifelike appearance. Then, they were displayed in the homes. It's a chilling thought, right? You're having dinner, and your great-aunt's plastered skull is watching you from a little alcove in the wall. You can almost hear it ghostly. Pass the chickpeas. Dear, historians still argue whether this was a form of ancestor worship, a way to keep the spirit of the family alive and present, or if it was a more practical, macabre display of family lineage. Maybe it was a little bit of both, a way to both honor and keep an eye on the dead, who were quite literally right under your feet. This practice of head cults is one of the most enigmatic aspects of the site. It suggests a deeply personal and intimate relationship with death that we can barely comprehend today. You couldn't just move on. You were always, quite literally, living with the past. The dust of their lives mingled with the dust of yours. A constant, unspoken reminder of the cycle of life and death, all contained within the walls of a single, sprawling village where the only way out was up. From the claustrophobic, roof-climbing world of Çatalhöyük, we now glide eastward, following the whispered winds of trade and migration across the vast, ancient landscapes of Asia. The sun-bleached mud brick gives way to a sprawling, planned city, a testament to order and foresight, but also to an almost impenetrable silence. We're arriving in the Indus Valley, specifically at the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, a place so ahead of its time that it feels like a glimpse into a parallel universe. Imagine a city with straight, grid-like streets, a sophisticated drainage system that would make modern sanitation engineers weep with joy, and multi-story houses all built with standardized mud bricks. It's like they invented the concept of urban planning and then just left. The entire civilization, flourishing around 2500 BCE, simply faded away. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Indus Valley civilization was a huge, widespread culture that rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia in size and sophistication. Unlike those other empires, however, The Indus people seem to have been remarkably peaceful. There's a notable lack of weapons, fortifications, and depictions of warfare in their archaeological record. It's a society that seems to have put its energy into engineering and art rather than conquest. Which is a truly refreshing, if slightly unbelievable, idea. A world without war? Sounds like a utopian fantasy, doesn't it? Well, it might have been, but it was one they lived for over 1,000 years. Now, for the quirky or fringe tidbit that's kept scholars up at night, they had a written language. A beautiful, enigmatic script of around 400 unique symbols, found on everything from pottery to small, carved seals. But here's the rub, no one has ever, in all of history, successfully deciphered it. We have the letters, but we don't have the key. It's like finding a book but not knowing what language it's written in. We have hundreds of these seals, little square blocks of steatite carved with images of animals and these strange pictorial symbols. One seal, in particular, shows a figure in a yogic pose, surrounded by animals. Is he a god? A king? A particularly chilled-out spiritual leader? No one knows. Historians still argue whether this script represents a true language with grammar and syntax, or if it's more of a proto-writing, a collection of symbols and emblems. The mystery is what it might reveal. If we could crack the code, what secrets would pour out? Would we find epic poems, tax records, or a detailed explanation of their advanced plumbing system? Maybe we'd learn about the first ever vegetarian society. Or maybe it would be a series of elaborate jokes that have been lying dormant for millennia. Imagine digging up the world's oldest dad jokes. The silence of the script is deafening, and it allows for endless speculation. You're holding a piece of a story, a key that refuses to turn, and all you can do is wonder what's behind the door. And maybe, just maybe, the reason they disappeared is written there. A cautionary tale about a people who built a perfect world and then saw it crumble for a reason we're not allowed to know. Leaving the silent, grid-like streets of Mohenjo-Daro behind, we now sail across time and the Arabian Sea, following the sun's path to a land of unimaginable grandeur and mystery, ancient Egypt. The air here is different. It's thick with the scent of spices, the dry dust of the desert, and something else, something chemical, medicinal, and faintly metallic. We stand in the shadow of a colossal pyramid, a mainstream historical fact that needs no introduction, and yet it feels like we're only looking at the surface of a much deeper, more complex story. We're not here to talk about pharaohs or mummies in the way you've always heard of them. We're here to talk about what they were really made of. The historical fact you probably already know is that the Egyptians were master stoneworkers, architects, and engineers. They built monuments that have literally stood the test of time, and their funerary practices, particularly mummification, are legendary. But the quirky or fringe tidbit that often gets overlooked is the astonishing complexity of their chemical concoctions. This wasn't just a simple process of wrapping a body in linen. It was a sophisticated, chemical-intensive art form that involved a surprising range of substances, some of which we still don't fully understand. We're talking about more than just natron salt and frankincense. We're talking about a veritable witch's brew of plant resins, oils, and other substances. Imagine a mortuary workshop, a space that smelled less like a tomb and more like a laboratory. The priests, acting as chemists, would use a variety of plant extracts, including substances like opium poppies, blue lotus, and even cannabis. These weren't just for medicinal purposes in the life of the living. Traces of these substances have been found in the remains of the dead, suggesting they were part of the mummification process itself, perhaps to help preserve the body or maybe even to prepare the spirit for its journey. It's a slightly different take on the term, rest in peace, when you consider you might have been embalmed with a cocktail of mind-altering substances. Maybe that's why they looked so serene in their sarcophagi. They were just really chill. And it's not just the dead. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians had a secret knowledge of advanced chemistry and pharmacology that went far beyond basic folk medicine. Some scholars believe that the priests held onto a hidden body of knowledge, a kind of esoteric science passed down through generations. They weren't just praying to gods, they were also experimenting with them, using these chemical compounds to induce altered states of consciousness, to communicate with the divine, or perhaps to simply have a really good time at their religious festivals. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we heard about in a dusty old scroll? That's just the tip of the iceberg. The use of mind-altering substances could be seen as a way to walk with the gods. A path to spiritual enlightenment that was literally chemical. It paints a picture of a society that was both profoundly spiritual and surprisingly scientific. A place where religion and pharmacology were not two separate fields, but two sides of the same papyrus scroll. A hidden world of chemical knowledge that has been lost to us, leaving behind only the faintest of ghostly echoes. As the chemical fumes of ancient Egypt fade, we now find ourselves navigating the sparkling blue waters of the Aegean Sea, toward a place as famous for its myth as it is for its history, the island of Crete. Forget the towering pyramids. Here, the architecture is more organic, more flowing, more labyrinthine. We are walking through the ruins of the Palace of Knossos, the heart of the Minoan civilization, which flourished around the same time the Indus Valley was at its peak. The mainstream historical fact is that the Minoans were an incredibly advanced and artistic society, known for their stunning frescoes, their mastery of the sea, and their unique palace architecture. They built a society without massive fortifications, suggesting they felt safe on their island, protected by their powerful navy. It sounds like a pretty great place to live, right? A vacation spot with a killer artistic scene. But you didn't come here for a tour of a peaceful palace. You came here because the palace has a dark, bloody secret. You are now standing in the very place that gave birth to one of the most enduring and terrifying legends of all time, the myth of the Minotaur. The story, as you know, involves a half-man, half-bull monster living in a complex labyrinth, demanding a tribute of young men and women from Athens to be sacrificed to it. It's a classic monster story, a tale of heroes and monsters. The quirky or fringe tidbit, however, is that this wasn't just a monster story. There's a good chance it was based on a very real, and far more unsettling, truth. Look around at the palace. It's a maze of corridors, courtyards, and rooms on multiple levels. A true labyrinth built for human-sized beings, not a half-bull demigod. Now, imagine a public spectacle in one of these courtyards. The famous bull leaping frescoes. These paintings show athletes, both male and female, literally leaping over the backs of charging bulls. It was a hugely popular and incredibly dangerous sport, part of their religious and cultural life. Now, what if the Minotaur wasn't a monster at all, but rather a particularly skilled and terrifying bull leaper? Or, even more chillingly, what if the Minotaur was the bull itself, and the tribute of youths from Athens weren't being eaten, but were being sent here to participate in these deadly games? Historians still argue whether the Minotaur myth was a way for the Greeks to demonize the Minoans, a powerful rival civilization, by taking their most sacred and dangerous ritual and twisting it into a gruesome story. It's a form of ancient propaganda. Think about it. A rival city sends its best and brightest to their doom in a foreign land. But not at the hands of a beast, but at the hands of an unforgiving audience. A crowd baying for a spectacular show, with the monster being a series of lethal, ritualized games. The maze wasn't for a beast, it was the palace itself. A confusing and disorienting place where a person could get lost and never find their way out. The monster was the sport, and the labyrinth was the palace. A beautiful cage where the people from Athens were simply the next round of entertainment. It's a more realistic, and arguably more horrifying, truth than a simple fairy tale of a man-bull in a dark cave. A monster you can kill. But an entire culture of deadly entertainment? That's much harder to defeat. The echoes of the Minoan bull leapers fade as we sail west, leaving the Aegean behind for a new empire, one that would come to define much of the Western world. We arrive in Rome, but we're not heading for the Colosseum or the Forum. We're going underground. The air here is damp and cool, the only light coming from a flickering oil lamp held in your hand. The sounds of the bustling city above are muffled, replaced by the faint drip of water and the rustle of your own footsteps. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman Empire was an expansive, well-oiled machine of law, conquest, and public life. Its citizens were expected to participate in state-sanctioned religion and social order. But beneath the streets, a different world thrived, a world of whispers and shadows. This brings us to our quirky or fringe tidbit. the secret underground societies that operated in direct defiance of the Roman state. These weren't just a few rogue groups. They were a complex network of cults and mystery religions that offered a sense of personal salvation and community that the public Roman religion lacked. We're talking about followers of Mithras, the Persian god of light, whose members would meet in underground temples called Mithraea. Imagine descending a stone staircase into a long, rectangular chamber, your eyes adjusting to the darkness. In the center, a raised platform where the initiates would reenact the slaying of a bull. A ritual meant to bring about a new life. Membership was exclusive to men, primarily soldiers, and it provided a brotherhood and a sense of purpose that made a long, hard life a little more bearable. But there were other groups, too, like the followers of Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry. The Roman state was initially cool with it, a little bit of a party god to let off steam. But as the cult grew, it became a bit of a problem. The wild, frenzied nighttime rites, or bacchanalia, became a place for political conspiracy, financial scheming, and general shenanigans. The Roman Senate eventually got spooked, issuing a decree in 186 BCE to heavily restrict and control the cult, driving it further underground and into the shadows. You can almost hear the senators grumbling. Kids these days, with their secret parties and their god of wine, it's just not proper. This was a civilization that valued order above all else. And these secret societies represented a dangerous kind of anarchy. A place where people could think and act outside the rigid control of the state. Historians still argue whether these cults were genuinely subversive and a threat to the Roman social fabric, or if they were simply a natural outlet for the more personal, emotional side of human faith that the state-run religion couldn't fulfill. These were places of secrets, of hidden rituals, of promises of an afterlife. They offered a way to connect directly with the divine, bypassing the often impersonal state priests. It's a testament to the human spirit's need for community and meaning beyond the mundane. While Rome built its empire on laws and legions, these underground societies built a shadow empire on faith and secrets. A quiet, powerful resistance that influenced the lives of countless Romans. From the lowest soldier to the highest official, the legacy of these cults, in some ways, helped pave the way for the rise of Christianity, another faith that started in the shadows and was initially seen as a dangerous underground movement. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Leaving the cool, damp tunnels beneath Rome, we now ascend and travel thousands of miles east, following the most famous trade route in human history, the Silk Road. The sun is a blazing disk in a cloudless sky, and the air is thick with the scent of spices, exotic perfumes, and the pungent aroma of camel. A mainstream historical fact is that the Silk Road was a network of trade routes connecting east and west. A grand exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures that profoundly shaped the world. From the 2nd century BCE to the 18th century, it was the lifeblood of global commerce, a grand highway of human connection. But beneath this grand narrative of cultural exchange lies a darker, more secret world, a shadow economy that flourished in the dust and heat. Here's the quirky or fringe tidbit. For every bolt of silk and every bundle of spices that traveled the Silk Road legally, there was a whole other market in illicit goods. This wasn't just about smuggling, this was about the trade in black market knowledge, rare and exotic animals, and, most chillingly, poisons. Imagine a bustling caravanserai, a roadside inn for travelers, while merchants haggle over tea and porcelain in the open courtyard. In the shadowed corners of the bazaar, a different kind of deal is going down. A man from the west might be trading for a rare bird from the east, a creature so prized it was considered a king's ransom. Another might be seeking out a local herbalist, not for a cure, but for a potent, untraceable poison derived from a rare plant found only in the mountains of Central Asia. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for goods, it was a pipeline for secrets. This clandestine trade in poisons and rare knowledge had a profound impact. It wasn't just for assassination. The knowledge of chemistry, remember our little Egyptian concoctions? That knowledge traveled. Alchemists and physicians, often one and the same, sought out new and mysterious ingredients to create powerful elixirs, cures, and yes, weapons. The black market knowledge exchange included advanced metallurgy from Persia, astronomical charts from India, and even the secrets of papermaking before they were officially revealed to the West. This was an intellectual black market. A place where information was a more valuable commodity than gold. It was a place where you could buy a map to a hidden kingdom or a recipe for a deadly toxin. A kind of ancient Amazon for things you probably shouldn't be buying. Historians still argue whether this shadow economy was a defining feature of the Silk Road or just a fringe element. Was it a fundamental part of the system, an unspoken understanding that certain goods would always be available outside the official channels? Or was it a minor blip in the grand scheme of things? The evidence is hard to come by, as these deals were, by their nature, untraceable, but the stories, the myths, and the legends surrounding the assassins and the secretive traders suggest that this was a powerful, if hidden, force. It's a reminder that where there is a market for the legal and the mundane, there is always a market for the forbidden and the dangerous. And sometimes, it's the forbidden things that change the world the most. Leaving the sun-scorched caravan routes of the Silk Road, we now travel far north, to the cold, misty shores of Scandinavia. The scent of wood smoke and a cold sea breeze replaces the spice-laden air. We are entering the world of the Vikings, a mainstream historical fact you know as a people of fearsome warriors and intrepid explorers. They sailed the seas in their longships, raiding distant lands and establishing trade routes and settlements that stretched from North America to the heart of Russia. You think of them as brutal, pragmatic, and entirely focused on the here and now. But a closer look at their funeral practices reveals a spiritual and esoteric side that is often overlooked. This brings us to the quirky or fringe tidbit, the deliberate and ritualistic use of toxic plants in Viking burials. We're talking about things like henbane, yew, and a variety of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Imagine a Viking funeral pyre, a massive longship prepared for its final journey, piled high with grave goods. This is a common image. But imagine something else now. Imagine the ritual, the prayers to Odin and Freya, and a small, almost unseen detail, the inclusion of poisonous plants in the pyre, or even in the body's final resting place. This wasn't for some kind of magical poison, a last-ditch effort to take out a rival from the grave. It was something much more spiritual, something much more tied to their beliefs about the afterlife. The Vikings believed in a concept known as cider, a form of shamanistic magic that involved divination and a kind of spiritual journeying. The use of mind-altering and toxic plants may have been a way to induce altered states of consciousness. Not just for the deceased, but for the living who were conducting the ritual. Imagine a shaman or a seeress, a vulva, using these plants to peer into the spirit world, to guide the deceased on their final journey to Valhalla or Folkvangr. The smoke from the pyre, laced with the fumes of henbane, would have created an otherworldly atmosphere, a literal chemical journey for both the living and the dead. The inclusion of these plants might also have been a symbolic gesture, a way of ensuring that the dead could walk in the spiritual world, even if their physical body was inert. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or limited to certain seers and chieftains. Was this a fundamental part of Viking religion, or was it a rare, fringe practice reserved for the most powerful? The evidence is often subtle, found in the pollen and plant remains of burial mounds, but it paints a picture of a people who were far more complex than just a collection of axe-wielding raiders. They were a people who sought to understand the spiritual world, to communicate with their gods, and to ensure their dead had a safe passage. It's a powerful reminder that even in the most pragmatic of societies, there is always a deep-seated need for the spiritual, the mystical, and the slightly poisonous. It's a different way to say goodbye. A final journey that's not just a physical one, but a chemical and spiritual one as well. It's a powerful ending to a life lived so ferociously. Leaving the cold, shamanistic rituals of the Vikings, we now journey south and forward in time to the heart of medieval Europe. To a group that has become a byword for mystery and forbidden knowledge, the Knights Templar. A mainstream historical fact is that the Templars were a powerful and influential military order during the Crusades. They were warrior monks, a new kind of force in the world, founded in the early 12th century to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They became incredibly wealthy and politically powerful, developing an early form of international banking. But their rapid rise and even more rapid fall left behind a trail of whispers, secrets, and a forbidden library of texts. The quirky or fringe tidbit is that the Templars are widely believed to have discovered or acquired ancient texts and artifacts in Jerusalem. Not just religious relics, but forbidden knowledge that went against the core tenets of Christianity. Imagine a secret chamber deep within their headquarters, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a room filled with scrolls and books that were not part of the standard Christian canon. These texts might have been from the Gnostics, a heretical Christian sect that believed in a secret, personal knowledge of God, or maybe even ancient Jewish or Islamic texts that contained a different, more esoteric view of the world. Remember those underground Roman cults and their secret societies? The Templars might have been the next evolution of that idea. A secret society hiding in plain sight. This hidden knowledge, according to legend, allowed them to tap into a different kind of power. A power that went far beyond mere wealth and military might. They were accused of everything from worshipping a severed head named Baphomet to practicing secret rites that involved a denial of Christ. While these charges were likely fabricated under torture by the King of France, Philip IV, they reflect a deep-seated fear and suspicion of what the Templars might have been hiding. The accusations were so wild and so specific that they must have had some root in the popular imagination. If not in reality, perhaps the Templars' private, secretive rituals, which were not open to outsiders, fed these rumors. They were a closed society with immense power. And that's a recipe for suspicion in any era. Historians still argue whether the Templars' heretical beliefs and secret texts were genuine or a convenient lie used by a king who wanted to seize their vast wealth. Was Baphomet a real idol they worshipped? Or was it a tortured confession given under duress? There's a certain irony in the fact that a group of warrior monks who vowed to protect pilgrims ended up being accused of the most heinous heresies imaginable. But the story of the Templars and their forbidden archives continues to resonate today. It's a powerful reminder that history is not just about what is written down, but also about what is hidden, what is whispered in the dark, and what is feared. Their story is a tale of a group who had access to a library that no one else could read. And that made them a threat to every king and pope in Europe. The destruction of the Templars wasn't just a political move, it was a raid on a secret vault of forbidden knowledge. A desperate attempt to burn the books they couldn't control. From the chilling demise of the Knights Templar, we now leap into one of the most terrifying periods in human history. One that seems to arrive from a different realm entirely. Forget kings and crusades for a moment, and instead, focus on the silent, unseen enemy that would reshape the world. We're talking about the Black Death. A mainstream historical fact is that the bubonic plague, carried by fleas on rats, swept across Eurasia in the mid-14th century, wiping out an estimated 75 to 200 million people. It was a demographic catastrophe, a dark period of death and despair that fundamentally altered the course of history, leading to major social, economic, and religious shifts. You probably picture a grim scene of medieval cities, doctors in strange masks, and a helpless population. But the quirky or fringe tidbit is that the plague's devastating spread wasn't just a random act of fate. Historians now believe there was a hidden architect, an unseen hand that made the pandemic far worse than it would have been otherwise. This architect was climate change, not in the modern sense, but a period known as the medieval climate anomaly followed by the Little Ice Age. Imagine a period of warm, wet weather that encouraged huge population growth and a boom in agriculture. Then, imagine a sudden, sharp reversal, with temperatures dropping and weather becoming more erratic. This caused widespread famine and weakened the population's immune systems just as the plague was arriving. A malnourished population is a vulnerable population. This isn't just a simple case of bad timing. Historians still argue whether this was the most important factor, or if it was just one of many. But the evidence suggests a more complex story. The plague itself originated in Central Asia, but it was the Mongol expansion that acted as a superhighway for the disease. The Mongols, remember our friends from the Silk Road a few sections ago? They inadvertently became the vectors of the disease, carrying it along their trade and military routes, all the way to the major ports of the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The disease didn't just walk to Europe, it rode in on the coattails of a global empire. You can almost see the microscopic drama playing out on a giant map. with the Mongol conquest and the changing climate creating the perfect storm for a biological catastrophe. So, the next time you think about the Black Death, remember it wasn't just a random act of a plague. It was a complex and horrifying blend of climate change, ancient migration patterns, and global trade. It was a hidden history playing out in real time. The changing weather weakened the people. The Mongol Empire brought the disease. And the global trade routes. Remember the Silk Road and the bustling ports. Spread it like wildfire. It was a perfect storm. And humanity was caught right in the middle of it. A terrifying reminder that the world's most dramatic events are often a confluence of hidden factors. A series of dominoes that fall in a way no one could have predicted. The ghost of the Black Death still lingers. A grim reminder of how fragile society can be. But from the ashes of that calamity, something new began to stir. A revolution not of war or plague, but of information. We are now in the mid-15th century. A time of intellectual upheaval. A mainstream historical fact is the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. This innovation, using movable type, democratized knowledge, making books and information accessible to a wider audience beyond the clergy and the elite. You probably picture a scholar poring over a new Bible. Its pages freshly inked. But that's just the cover of the story. The quirky or fringe tidbit is that the printing press's most powerful and immediate impact wasn't on religion or literature, but on the clandestine spread of revolutionary and forbidden knowledge. This new technology was a secret weapon for those who sought to challenge the established order. Imagine a small, dusty workshop tucked away in a back alley of a German town. It's not printing Bibles. It's printing pamphlets and broadsheets filled with radical ideas, heretical tracts, political satires, and even scientific theories that went against the teachings of the Church. This was a quiet, powerful revolution happening under the nose of the authorities. It was a kind of ancient dark web, a place where forbidden ideas could be shared without fear of being caught. Before the printing press, if you wanted to spread a dangerous idea, you had to find a scribe, and then that scribe had to painstakingly copy it by hand. It was a slow, expensive, and easily controlled process. But with the printing press, a single individual could print hundreds, even thousands, of copies of a pamphlet overnight. Imagine the fear this created in the minds of the powerful. You could burn a book, but you couldn't burn an idea that had already spread across the continent. This was the first true information war, a struggle for the hearts and minds of the people, fought not with swords but with ink. Historians still argue whether the printing press was a force for genuine intellectual enlightenment or a dangerous tool that accelerated social and religious conflict. Did it create the Reformation by allowing Martin Luther's ideas to spread like wildfire? Or did it just provide a platform for a long simmering discontent to finally boil over? The printing press, in this hidden history, was less about creating beautiful books and more about creating beautiful trouble. It allowed for the mass production of satire, insults, and subversive drawings that lampooned the powerful. Remember those secrets of the Knights Templar and the heretical ideas they were accused of having? Now imagine those same ideas, not locked in a secret vault, but printed on 1,000 pamphlets, passed from hand to hand in the street. The printing press was the great equalizer, a tool that gave the powerless a voice and the powerful a new kind of enemy, an enemy made of paper and ink. The quiet hum of the printing press now fades into the clang of beakers and the hiss of furnaces. We are now in the heart of the Renaissance, a period of breathtaking art and scientific discovery. A mainstream historical fact is that this was a time of renewed interest in classical learning and humanism. A flowering of culture that produced geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. But while the artists were painting masterpieces and the scholars were translating ancient Greek, a darker, more secretive pursuit was happening behind closed doors. This was the age of the alchemists, and they were not always who they seemed. The quirky or fringe tidbit is that many of Europe's most powerful rulers were secretly and heavily funding alchemists in their castles and court laboratories. They weren't just looking for a way to turn lead into gold, which is the popular myth. They were looking for something much more profound and dangerous, a hidden body of knowledge that could grant them unimaginable power. The search for the philosopher's stone, for example, wasn't just about wealth. It was about creating an elixir of life, a substance that could grant immortality. Imagine a king who believes he can live forever. A concept that would change the entire power structure of the world. These alchemists weren't the mad scientists you see in cartoons. They were often highly intelligent, well-connected individuals who were at the cutting edge of what we would now call chemistry and metallurgy. They were the ones who were pushing the boundaries of what was known. And their patrons, the rulers of Europe, were willing to pay a king's ransom for their secrets. Remember that chemical knowledge from ancient Egypt and the illegal trade in poisons from the Silk Road? This was the next step in that hidden history. It was a centuries-long chain of intellectual inheritance, with each generation building on the last. An alchemist's laboratory was a place of secrets, a space where the line between science and magic was so blurry it practically didn't exist. Historians still argue whether these rulers genuinely believed in the promises of the alchemists or if they were just shrewdly investing in early scientific research, hoping for a breakthrough that would give them a military or economic advantage. Was Queen Elizabeth I's court mathematician, John Dee, a true magician or an early scientist and a brilliant spy? Maybe he was all three. The patronage of these hidden arts suggests that even in the age of reason and classical learning, there was a powerful belief in the esoteric, the occult, and the possibility of a world beyond what could be seen and touched. The Renaissance was a time of light and beauty, but it also had a dark, magical underbelly, a world of powerful men seeking to bend the laws of nature to their will. It's a reminder that even the most rational of leaders will always be tempted by the promise of the impossible. From the clandestine laboratories of Renaissance alchemists, we now move into an era that is often seen as the very antithesis of magic and superstition, the Enlightenment. A mainstream historical fact is that this was the Age of Reason, a period of intellectual and philosophical fervor that championed logic, science, and individual liberty. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke challenged the old order and laid the groundwork for modern democracy. You probably picture powdered wigs, grand salons, and fiery debates over human rights. But what if the Age of Reason had a shadow? A hidden life that was far more mysterious and occult than we are led to believe? This brings us to the quirky or fringe tidbit, the Enlightenment's powerful and deeply embedded occult undercurrents. While the philosophers were writing about reason and liberty, a network of secret societies and esoteric beliefs was thriving beneath the surface. We're talking about groups like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, whose members included some of the most famous figures of the era. Benjamin Franklin, a founding father of the United States, was a Freemason. Mozart was a Freemason. These weren't just a bunch of guys in funny hats with secret handshakes. These were powerful men who were part of a brotherhood that was seeking a kind of spiritual and moral enlightenment that went beyond what was taught in the official churches and universities. These groups were obsessed with ancient knowledge, Hermeticism, and a kind of spiritual alchemy. They were creating a new kind of social and intellectual space, a place where people from different social classes could meet as equals, bound by a shared sense of purpose and a desire for hidden knowledge. Remember our alchemists and their search for the philosopher's stone? These groups, in a way, were the next step in that journey. They were seeking not to turn lead into gold in a literal sense, but to turn the base human soul into a more perfect, enlightened being. It was a kind of spiritual metallurgy. Their rituals and symbols, often borrowed from ancient Egypt and other forgotten cultures, were not just for show, they were meant to be a path to personal transformation. Historians still argue whether these secret societies were genuinely revolutionary, helping to fuel events like the American and French revolutions, or if they were just a kind of intellectual club for the elite. A place for powerful men to network and feel a sense of purpose. Was the Enlightenment a time when people abandoned the occult in favor of pure reason? Or was it a time when the occult simply went underground, hiding in plain sight in the symbols and rituals of new, influential societies? The truth is, it was probably both. The Enlightenment was a period of profound change, and change is often messy. While some sought to banish the old superstitions, others found a new way to embrace them, a more subtle and organized way to seek out the hidden truths of the universe. The Age of Reason, in this sense, was also the Age of Secrets, a time when the light of knowledge was also casting the longest shadows. The whispered secrets of the Enlightenment's hidden societies now give way to the thunder of cannons and the march of armies. We are now at the turn of the 19th century, a time dominated by one of history's most iconic and complex figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. A mainstream historical fact is that the Napoleonic Wars reshaped the map of Europe. A conflict fueled by military genius and the clash of empires. You probably picture vast battlefields, grand victories, and a relentless march of French soldiers. But beneath the clash of steel and the roar of artillery, a different kind of war was being waged. A psychological war fought with words, images, and whispers. This brings us to the quirky or fringe tidbit, the surprisingly modern and systematic use of propaganda and disinformation by both Napoleon and his enemies. This wasn't just a simple matter of painting the enemy as evil. This was a sophisticated, state-sponsored campaign to control the narrative, to shape public opinion, and to sow chaos behind enemy lines. Remember that printing press from a few sections ago? It was now a weapon. Napoleon himself was a master of public relations. He created a persona, a myth of an unstoppable genius. Through a steady stream of carefully curated news reports, official bulletins, and art, his bulletins from the battlefield were more than just reports. They were works of fiction designed to inspire awe in his own troops and fear in his enemies. On the other side, the British and other European powers were just as active. They created an entire industry of caricatures and satirical prints that depicted Napoleon as a short, tyrannical monster, a kind of ancient political cartoon aimed at turning the public against him. Think of a newspaper cartoon today, but with much higher stakes and a much more personal touch. They also used disinformation to spread rumors of French defeats, of Napoleon's ill health, or of unrest among his troops. It was a war of ideas, a war of perception, and it was often just as important as a war of attrition. It was a direct application of psychological warfare, a way to make the enemy feel as if their cause was hopeless, even if their armies were still standing. Historians still argue whether this early form of media warfare was a decisive factor in the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars, or if it was just a sideshow to the real conflict on the battlefield. Was Napoleon's power built on the reality of his military victories? Or was it a house of cards held together by his own brilliant propaganda? The truth is, it was both. The power of an idea, the power of a rumor, can be a potent weapon. It can weaken an enemy from within, turn a population against their leader, and inspire a whole generation to fight for a cause. The Napoleonic Wars weren't just a military conflict. They were the first great modern information war. A hidden history of whispers, lies, and carefully crafted narratives. The lessons learned in this era would be applied again and again in every conflict that followed. A grim testament to the power of a well-told story, even when that story is a lie. The Napoleonic era's thunderous campaigns now subside, giving way to the soft, gaslit glow of Victorian England. We are in a world of bustling industry, grand scientific achievements, and rigid social conventions. A mainstream historical fact is that the Victorian era, spanning most of the 19th century, was a time of immense technological progress and social change. An age defined by the Industrial Revolution, the expansion of the British Empire, and a fierce sense of moral propriety. You probably picture steam engines, corsets, and a strict, buttoned-up society that was prim and proper to a fault. But what was bubbling beneath that highly polished surface? This brings us to the quirky or fringe tidbit, the era's bizarre and widespread obsession with seances, spiritualism, and a hidden world of the occult. While scientists were busy discovering new elements and publishing theories on evolution, a huge number of people, including many from the highest echelons of society, were trying to communicate with the dead. Imagine a small, darkened room in a London townhouse. A group of people sitting around a table, their hands linked. A medium, a person who claimed to be able to channel the spirits, goes into a trance. The table starts to shake. A bell rings from the other side of the room, and a ghostly voice whispers from the shadows. These were called seances, and they were a major part of Victorian social life. It was a kind of spiritual theater, a way to connect with a hidden world that was just out of reach. The popularity of spiritualism was partly a reaction to the rapid pace of scientific discovery. As science began to explain more and more of the natural world, it left a void for the mystical and the supernatural. People were seeking something more, something that science couldn't explain. This was especially true after the massive loss of life from diseases and the seemingly endless wars. People were looking for comfort, a way to connect with their lost loved ones. The occult offered a kind of solace that was both emotionally powerful and socially acceptable. At least within certain circles. It was a way to believe in magic in an increasingly rational world. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine spiritual movement or just a sophisticated form of entertainment and fraud. Was the era's fascination with the paranormal a sign of a deep-seated spiritual need? Or was it a form of mass hysteria? An escape from the harsh realities of industrial life? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. The Victorian obsession with the occult was a hidden history of a society that, despite its best efforts, was not entirely rational. It was a society that was wrestling with big questions about life, death, and the nature of the universe. And in the quiet, candlelit rooms of 1,000 townhouses, they were searching for answers in a place that science simply couldn't reach. It's a reminder that no matter how advanced we become, we will always be fascinated by the things that go bump in the night. Especially when they promise to bring back the ones we've lost. The hushed rooms of Victorian séances now give way to the deafening industrial carnage of the 20th century's first global conflict. The world is at war. But this isn't just a war of trenches and machine guns. We are now in the midst of World War I, a mainstream historical fact that you know is a brutal, mechanized, and utterly devastating conflict that saw the end of old empires and the rise of a new, more modern kind of warfare. You probably picture a muddy trench, a young man with a rifle, and a constant sense of dread. But behind the front lines, a secret war was being waged. A bizarre and often overlooked conflict of intelligence and espionage. This brings us to the quirky or fringe tidbit, the unconventional and often absurd methods of spying and intelligence gathering used during the Great War. Forget James Bond. This was more like a fever dream of espionage. Imagine pigeons with tiny cameras strapped to their chests, flying over enemy lines to take aerial photos. They were literally using bird-brained spies. Or what about listening trees? Trees in no man's land that were hollowed out and fitted with microphones, allowing soldiers to listen in on enemy conversations. The Germans even tried to train badgers to dig tunnels under enemy trenches. Yes, badgers, because when you're out of good ideas, you might as well try to weaponize a grumpy forest creature. But the real secret history here is the psychological and human element of this kind of warfare. Remember those Napoleonic propaganda posters? They were a baby step compared to this. The Allies and the Central Powers were locked in a constant battle of misinformation. Trying to break the will of the other side, they used forged documents, rumors, and even fake spiritualists and mediums to try and deceive the other side. This was a war that was fought not just with steel, but with whispers. It was a kind of hidden game of chess. A game that was being played by people who were making up the rules as they went along. Historians still argue whether these bizarre espionage methods and the psychological warfare had a decisive impact on the war's outcome, or if they were just a weird and desperate sideshow to the main event. Did a pigeon cam really turn the tide of a battle? Probably not, but the fact that they tried is a powerful testament to the desperation and ingenuity of a world at war. This was a war that forced people to think outside the box, to use every tool at their disposal, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. It's a reminder that even in the most brutal of conflicts, there is always a hidden story, a bizarre and often absurd tale that is just as much a part of the history as the battles themselves. The Great War was a hidden history of a world that was tearing itself apart, but also trying to find new and creative ways to win, no matter what it took. The long, winding thread of our journey has now reached its final knot. We've walked the quiet streets of the first cities, sailed across ancient seas, and peered into the clandestine laboratories and dark corridors of history. The images are fading now, the faces becoming softer, the sounds becoming quieter. The hum of the ancient world is giving way to a gentle silence. A quiet place where all of these stories can rest. Close your eyes and let the last of these images drift away. The Minoan bull leaper, the Roman shadows, the Viking shaman's smoke, and the ghostly flicker of the printing press. All of it now just a memory. A story that you have held for a little while. The world is full of these hidden histories. These forgotten moments that make up the vast and sprawling tapestry of who we are. There's no more running now. No more fighting. No more secrets to uncover. Just the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. A quiet stillness that is yours alone. The story is over now. You can let go.